The food on your plate, it's been on a pretty long journey to get there. And along the way, there's this whole complex system of checks and balances working behind the scenes to keep it safe. So today, we're going to break down the key standards that protect our food supply, basically from the farm all the way to your fork.
And it all really boils down to this one simple question. I mean, think about it. Every time you're at the grocery store, you're placing your trust in this huge global network of farmers and processors and distributors. So what's actually holding all that trust together?
Because let's be honest, when that trust is broken, the consequences are, well, they're severe. We're not just talking about a little upset stomach here. Food contamination can lead to really serious health crises. It can absolutely destroy a company's reputation overnight, and it can result in recalls that cost millions upon millions. The stakes just couldn't be higher for everyone.
Okay, so to manage all these risks, the industry created a kind of global framework. This is where the Global Food Safety Initiative, or GFSI, comes into play. You can think of it as the gold standard, a universal benchmark for safety that companies all over the world can look to and follow.
So how do we know if companies are actually living up to these standards? Well, it all starts by looking inward. Let's talk about how companies basically give themselves a report card through their own internal audits. Now, the key term you got to know here is non-conformance. It sounds a little formal, but it's just a way of saying something went wrong. A rule was broken. A requirement wasn't met. It's basically a red flag that an audit is designed to find.
But here's the thing. Not all failures are created equal. A minor nonconformance is kind of like getting a C on a homework assignment. It's not great, but it's a small issue you can fix. A major nonconformance, though, that's like failing the final exam. It signals a really significant risk, a potential breakdown in the whole system that needs immediate and very serious attention.
So, how do we take all these findings from an audit and turn them into a single, useful number? It's actually a pretty straightforward calculation. First, you just count up all the nonconformances you found. Then you divide that by the total number of facilities you looked at. And there you have it, a clear nonconformance rate. Let's just walk through a quick example. Imagine a company audits 40 of its facilities and finds 8 major issues. Okay, so you divide 8 by 40 and you get a major nonconformance rate of 20%. That one simple number tells a really powerful story about potential systemic risk across the whole organization.
But just finding a problem is only half the battle. What's maybe even more important is whether the company actually fixes it. And that's where the corrective action rate comes in. It measures exactly that. What percentage of the problems they found were actually solved?
The logic here is just as clear. You count up all the successful fixes, all those corrective actions. Then you divide that number by the total number of problems that you found in the first place. Simple as that. So if our company with those 8 major issues managed to successfully fix 7 of them, their corrective action rate would be 87.5%. Now, a high rate like that is a great sign. It tells you the company has strong internal controls and that they're serious about fixing their mistakes. Of course, the goal is always going to be 100%, right? Because even one unresolved major issue is a risk you just can't ignore. Okay, so a company can have its own house in perfect order, but what about all the ingredients they're buying from other suppliers? The risk doesn't just magically stop at their factory doors, and that brings us to our next critical area, securing the entire supply chain. So this metric looks at a company's direct suppliers, what they call Tier 1, and it measures what percentage of them are certified under that same global GFSI standard we talked about. So in this example, 80% of their products by cost come from certified sources. That's pretty strong, but it also immediately flags that 20% gap where risk could be hiding. And here's why this matters so much. The higher that percentage, the more a company has protected itself from outside risks. It's a direct measure of how seriously they take the safety of the ingredients they bring into their own products, which of course lowers the overall risk of contamination for everyone.
Of course, even with the best systems in the world, things can still go wrong. And when they do, it often results in the most public-facing failure you can have, a product recall.
Now, recalls really come in 2 main flavors. A voluntary recall is when a company spots a problem themselves and pulls the product. An involuntary recall, on the other hand, is when a government regulator, like the FDA, has to step in and force them to do it. One shows they're being proactive, the other suggests a problem was missed internally.
First up, we just look at the total number of recalls. It's a raw count of how many times a company had to pull a product for safety reasons in, say, a year. And believe me, every single one of these is a major event. But the number of recalls is only one part of the story. The other part is the scale. How much product was actually affected?
Here we're seeing 500 metric tons. This number gives you a sense of the sheer volume of the failure and its potential impact on all of us, the consumers.
For any major recall, transparency is just everything. Companies should be telling us not just that it happened, but why it happened, how much it's going to cost, what they're doing to fix the root cause, and whether it was voluntary. This is how you start to rebuild trust after a major failure.
And that really brings us to our final and maybe most important point. All of these numbers we've talked about, non-conformances, corrective actions, supplier certifications, recall details, they're ultimately all about building trust through transparency.
In the end, it's about this. When every company uses the same playbook, the same set of rules to report on food safety, it creates real accountability. It lets all of us, consumers, investors, regulators, to compare how companies are doing and make informed decisions about who we trust with our food.
So the next time you're walking down that grocery aisle, you'll have a much better sense of all the invisible systems that are working to keep you safe. You now understand the language of food safety. So the question is, how does that change the way you see the food on the shelves?